All right, everybody. I am excited to welcome Dr. Lori Mulvey and Dr. Sam Richards onto the podcast. Lori and Sam, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming onto the program. I know you both are incredibly busy and you also do some travel as well. I know you recently just came back from Korea, so hope the transition back to Eastern time wasn't too bad. But I'm glad to see that we're all here, and I really want to start with prefacing by saying that this episode is going to be very unique in that we're going to be talking about race, ethnicity, and culture, but we're going to be doing so, I think, in a slightly different manner. So, the first half hour or so, we're going to be speaking about world in conversation and Social 119. And then the second half, I've told Lori and Sam that we're going to have a bit of a slightly open conversation, a discussion of some kind to discuss being mixed race in America. As some listeners will know, I am mixed race. My dad is of Ukrainian descent. My mom is of Taiwanese descent. I think it's a really interesting conversation to have about
Hmm.
how to think about these issues and how to move forward with them in a way. Lori, I'm going to start with you in terms of introduction. So, would you mind sharing a bit more about yourself and how you really discovered sociology in this space that we're going to be discussing today?
Well, first of all, I'm the founding director of World in Conversation, which I co-founded with my lovely husband and colleague, Sam Richards. And we started as the Race Relations Project, and we were posing a question: what is going on in this generation with race? This generation meaning in the early 2000s. I can explain more about that another time. But that was really the question that inspired us to actually start having cross-campus conversations. I'm from New Jersey. I'm the oldest of four kids. Newark, New Jersey. Everybody knows Newark, even though they like to think of it as New York. I mean, the airport anyway. But that's where I'm from. So from the working class, and very much, I think, because of that, I think a social worker at heart. Even though I feel like I'm also just a lifetime student of just whatever I can learn. But I really feel close to people and to what's happening on the ground, whatever that is or wherever that is. So that's me.
Excellent. And Sam, can you describe a bit more about yourself and how you got
Yeah.
interested in sociology? I imagine that sociology was quite a glue that put you and Lori together to work together and to be married to one another.
Yeah. Well, I'm from Toledo, Ohio, and I am working class also. So Lori and I have that connection. We met at Rutgers University. I went to University of Toledo for my undergrad and my master's, studied sociology. I wasn't a very good student in grade school or high school, or at least I was a good student in the ideal sense that I enjoyed reading and thinking, but I didn't take grades very seriously. So I went
We're
to
going to
University of
class.
Toledo or going to class or doing homework or doing anything really. Uh, but I wanted to be a rock and roll drummer and I worked a lot. My dad died when I was 9, so I was working all the time. Because, when you're working class, that's the kind of the thing you got to do. But in any case, I just fell in love with sociology in my third year in college, and then I never looked back. And in retrospect, I just I enjoy learning things, just like Lori, learning things. I like learning about people, like learning about different cultures, and so I traveled in a lot, and then just really dug into sociology.
And
Yeah.
I should say, the funny thing is, I only took one sociology class in my life, and that was Sam's class when I was 21 and he was 25. So I was a senior in college, and it was my one sociology class, and he was a grad student. And and in terms of the evolution of the conversation between us, which is now most of our lives, it really has started with and centered around sociology and Sam's way of thinking, because I was very much a psychological thinker and a legal kind of thinker. And I really developed the sociological imagination, and it changed. I mean, it's been a lifetime of that, but it's totally shifted my way of being in the world.
That's incredible. And Sam, that must have been one heck of a class. I'm sure you did a fantastic job teaching.
Uh, no, in retrospect, I have no idea. Yeah, like I've been teaching for 41 years, and any teacher is going to look back at their early years and think, "Oh my God, I was a hot mess and I didn't know anything." The wisdom doesn't come till you're in it about 30 years or so, if you can get any wisdom. But I will say one little factoid that I think is valuable. About a year and a half after Lori took that class, I was teaching another intro to sociology class, and she was reading the textbook that I used. And
Because I
and
was
she,
like the TA for the class. It was a summer class, and I
Mhm.
was TAing it.
And so she came upon the sociological imagination, which is the key concept in sociology. There are many key concepts, but I think it's the key concept.
Hmm.
Anyway, and she just really spoke it back to me in a way that I had heard it in this really unique way for the first time. So I always say that Lori, interesting enough, turned me on to the sociological imagination. So that's pretty cool.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I love how you both describe that imagination element, that creativity element to some degree, because I think seems like this is a space where it really does require the human imagination and to be able to picture things when, particularly as you're teaching a new concept, I imagine. It's always easier to describe in pictures. It's almost like the expression, a picture paints 1,000 words.
Hmm.
Mm.
Lori, I'd like to now turn to you to talk about world and conversation. And we spoke about this a little bit before our recording today. And the simple thing is, I really feel like conversation is where you can have that human connectivity. And
Hmm.
it's in this day and age when everything's instantaneous, everyone wants to get the new news or the new facts or the new this, and novelty is good, but for a lot of these very important issues, it takes time and effort to connect with someone, particularly when it's someone whom you have disagreements with. And one of the amazing things I love about World in Conversation is this idea that you're putting these small groups together, you're discussing some of the biggest issues, even issues that people wouldn't even want to discuss out
Exactly.
there.
No one
Uh,
wants to.
so, so what can you tell us about the mission and the vision and the values of World in Conversation? How this organization and this method differs from other ways of communication and just a conversation about controversial topics and issues.
Hmm. Well, I've learned a lot through what is really grounded theory, which is a sociological qualitative method of research. And it's very natural to me to be, like I said earlier, on the ground, listening to people and observing what they say, what they think, what they do. And so I've had so many conversations over the years. I didn't know why I was doing it. Literally, this was just an opportunity, a job, a need that was put in front of me to help students to have conversations on campus, and it obviously turned into my whole life. But so I didn't have an ambition, I didn't have a strategy. But what I wound up learning over time is that there's a structure to conflict. That's one thing, and that their groups need facilitators, and we all know about group think, right? But what I really kind of ride on is group thinking, because I think people are much smarter when they think together, that is when multiple brains are working. But most of the time what we see is conformity, right? Because people want to belong. It's so natural to us. Socialization itself is a way of belonging to a group. And so a couple those things put together over many many years of listening to people in all kinds of conflicts all around the world, the key message is, your conflict is not unique as much as everybody wants to think it is, and there are ways to work with conflict, and you can't do it by yourself. And so what we wind up doing and what we've been doing is really training people to become facilitators. And how it's different and also how it's controversial is that we emphasize that you must take all sides if you're a facilitator. And if you think about the era that we're in, and the high levels of social conflict. Taking all sides is being a professional trader, and nobody likes it. And yet that is the only way that you can be effectively between people in conflict and make anything positive happen. So there's a lot to say in all of that. I already said a lot, but I don't think that it is easy to take all sides. And I think what's unique about us is the way we support a practice that necessitates that, and then actually shifts the mindset of the people who become facilitators.
So fascinating. I like what you said about how these conflicts are not unique to just one person. I always
Or
say
one
that when
society or one situation, or it's whatever the history is. It's
Mm.
There's a structure that is not unique. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but yeah.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
No worries, no worries. Sam, did you want to add something or?
Yeah, or one social cause. Each cause they feel like, okay, but this is unique. The environmental movement, these issues, and what we're going through and what we're trying to do are really, really special to us. And it's like, well, but the context, the structure is the same.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I completely agree because there's always events and movements and whatnot that previous generations have built as well. So it's also important, I think, recognize that we can't just kind of put ourselves on the pedestal and say we're the only ones who are defending this or that. There's so many people in the past who have gone through much tougher challenges, I would argue, and
Hmm.
uh, and
Hmm.
it's hard for us to put into context, which I think is a common theme for a lot of political and social issues. Lori, I'd like to build a bit more on those findings in terms of constructive dialogue. One of the things I find fascinating is that people really are looking for those institutions and those arenas where they can sit down and spend time and have conversations. And I think a lot of people always expect for whatever conversation to expect some kind of result, whether it be like, oh, I won that debate or I owned that person. That's kind of the new social media thing. And I don't know if that's very, very effective, really. I think it's important to just hear from someone's perspective instead of feeling like everything is a battle and that you have to win it. So, what can you share more about some of these findings that and observations that you've seen with World of Conversation and how that kind of fits in with how we can understand and talking about these issues in a much larger
Hmm.
context?
Well, I think we first have to separate it from what is above us, which is leadership, right? Because leadership, whatever the nature of leadership is in whatever countries that we live in, leadership has to lead. And there is, and that's, and gaining those positions puts you in a zero sum game, right? It's like you win the position or you don't. And so win, lose. At the same time, there's so much communication that happens from above that we forget, and we think that that's actually how communication happens, is what we're seeing. But actually, when we're talking about most of the rest of us, that is the civilians, the citizens, overwhelmingly, we are not in a zero sum game. And so when we mistake what we see in leadership, and I use leadership because it's the one we most focus on, or it's the most visible. So even though you're talking, negotiating, having diplomacy, making decisions, this is different than what we as citizens, people, families, groups, communities are doing. So there are no winners. Actually, we all win or we all lose, is what I say. And so while on a national or international stage, it might not benefit someone to collaborate, so they think, it benefits all of us to collaborate and to, like I said, think together. So I think the most important part is you have to realize that we all win or we all lose. And so debates, I think we have to bring different ideas together, but I don't think deciding who's winning or losing or who has the best argument helps anyone. And so final thing I'll, not final, but in this moment, final thing I'll say is, when people come into a dialogue with us and using this method, the thinking together method, we see each person has a piece of the truth. So we're not debating whose truth, because if it's not true, it's not part of the truth. So the point is, everyone has a piece. Let's put them together like a puzzle and see the larger truth rather than exile certain ones that certain people don't want to be true. And so that's the work, is putting pieces, finding the truth that is in each one of us and putting it together with the other parts, because we miss all of that when we decide, oh, I'm going to win the argument. Great. You were smarter at being able to shut somebody up, but you missed their ideas and all the things that they had to say that were valuable.
I'm glad you said that. We're all either winners or losers,
Hmm.
in depending on how we construct those conversations. And I'm sure there were probably countless people who left that room thinking, "Wow, I may not have changed my mind, but I now know why someone thinks this way." And who knows how many more conversations come out afterwards? Maybe people make new friends or something. So,
Well, it goes beyond that. It's actually, once you realize that your opponent has valuable information, you realize that you have to work together, because I also say, if you're building a house and you're just building it with the electricians, you're not building a very good house, right? You need plumbers and architects and designers and masons and all of those things. So it's the same with anything we're trying to build or do. We need those different ideas. Those ideas should not be at war. The plumbers are not at war with the masons. You know what I mean? Like, that's just foolish. And so, but we let ourselves be fooled time and time again.
our family has done a lot of renovation work in this house. What I can tell you is what brings people together is like things like food and all that. And I'm glad
It's
that
that
we're not we're pitting two different traits together. I think you're absolutely right. Everyone's working on their bit of the house, and guess what? The house is better every single time. So
absolutely.
fantastic. Well, Sam, I'm going to turn to you now, and let's discuss a bit about Social 119. This is a great complement to what Lori was discussing there about the purpose of conversation. And when I ask people to, of course, check out the show notes below the episode to learn more about Social 119 and to actually watch these classes, which are broadcasts on YouTube. I have to say, Sam, this is a class where if I were to go back in time and I rolled in Penn State, I would most certainly take this class, because this class is different than almost any other class I can imagine. And I'd like for you to share with our audience today an overview of Social 119 and what makes this class different in terms of its focus on race, ethnicity, and culture, which is, first of all, a great title, but also it's such a significant set of three, almost like a three-legged stool, that I think we are lacking, whether on college campuses or in other institutions in our country and world.
Mm. Well, it's also the place out of which World in Conversation emerged. So this'll I'll talk about it, and this kind of takes us back to World in Conversation. I started teaching it in the fall of 1991. I came here to Penn State to be with Lori. Actually, she came here to do her PhD, and I was living in Ecuador, and needed a place to write my dissertation, and so I came here, and never
That was
didn't
it,
think
Sam? You just
that
came here because you needed a place to write your
I,
dissertation?
no, no, I wanted to live. I wanted to live with my darling life partner. We weren't married at the time. No. Yeah, that did sound like that. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Oh
No,
my gosh.
I know why you came, but I just it did
I
sound
know
like
it's funny though.
that.
So anyway, I started, but I'm an internationalist, like a globalist in my thinking. So I started teaching this class that was originally about U.S. race relations, but I very quickly started talking about international issues. And the class, a lot of students from international students were enrolled. And the first year, I think I had the first semester 150 students, and now we're up to 800. And yeah, it's just, well, here, I used to lecture more. I mean, when I taught smaller classes, I always had open discussion. And then even in this class, I would pass mics around and we would talk. And it was never a pure lecture. But I used to talk more than I do now, and even have kind of a set of ideas that I would use. And but eventually when you teach for a long time, that gets kind of old. It gets old and it gets boring. It's
Can
not interesting. Go ahead,
can I
Lori.
add two things to that you can
Yeah.
jump off of?
Yeah.
Because this it's hard for any of us to really see our own self develop, and so I have a front
Yeah.
row seat to watching Sam develop. And at some point in his work, he started to just in the class was really big, and he was a lecturer, and people really were drawn to the way he did that for whether other reasons we could talk about. um and so the class had a following, if you will, way back before any of this, talking to students that you see now happened. But one of the things that happened as the class got larger is Sam just spontaneously would just asks a student a question that was really unusual. And one of them, and the most, and he was recording the class at the time because he was developing an online class. And the one that was the most significant was when had a black student, a black man, and he said, "Can you find the redneck in the room?" And 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 so that actually got the attention, and he would just spontaneously have those moments, and it was kind of fun, and but also really interesting, right? It really made
And
people
kind of
think.
edgy and
And edgy,
edgy.
but of course, there was drama, there was humor, there was all kinds of things, and there was learning. And one of the producers of the local public television station saw that somehow, or heard about it. And so then eventually there was this, they started to film the class and wanted to create a PBS show. And so that actually, what that made Sam do was do more of that, and then do it more predictably, and then do more and more of it. And so there was this real turn that you didn't choose, Sam, but it was like other people saw it in you, that you had this ability when you were interacting with students that was different than what you were doing just as a lecturer. And I feel
Mm.
like that's just so important to the
Yeah, you're right.
evolution of Social 19.
You're right. That's the jumping off point. And so then we started to for a while as we were preparing for the television show, Lori would watch from the sound booth in the back, and then she would speak in my ear. We had a monitor system set up, and she would feed me questions and different things in my ear, that because in the moment, you're in front of 800 people and cameras, and I'm in the live engaging with people, like a comedian does when the comedian's ad-libbing, and riffing with the audience. And it's kind of, yeah, it's complex, especially when you're talking about the most controversial issues of the day and trying not to get canceled.
And when you're
Anyway,
fundamentally someone who has evolved as a speaker, because that's
yeah,
what you are. So you had to, Sam says he's my best student. So he had to learn to be a facilitator, a
yeah,
specific kind of facilitator in a public space. But he had, so yeah, so I used to, and I did this with students in terms of World and Conversation. We're not doing it right now, but for many years, they would be in a dialogue and I would be in the other room talking in their ear and suggesting a question, suggesting a move. What about this? You forgot that person. What about what then?
yeah.
And
Talk to
that's what
that
I would.
guy in the blue shirt right
Yeah, yeah.
there. Go
Or
back
wait,
to him.
wait. You forgot your question. You were
Yeah.
asking this. Now stay with the
Yeah.
question. Blah blah blah. And so Sam, I would do this. I did the same with Sam for a couple semesters, I think.
Yeah, it was good. So I'll tie this up quickly. So now we've got 800 students in the room. I asked, they fill out a volunteer form if they want to be part of one of the volunteers, and about 200 of them every semester volunteer. And what that means is before class, I let them know ahead of time, hey, can you volunteer today? I don't tell them the topic. They never have any idea, but they come and they come up to the front of the room, and then we have the topic, whatever it might be. And and then, and they're nervous because we're on YouTube, man, and people are watching from all over the world, and like but what we find is that students are really thoughtful. When I don't ask them questions about history and knowledge, things that require them to study and prepare. I just ask them to talk about their lives and what they see, because this is what I've learned from Lori and her work. Just get people to share what they already know and what they see. And so anyway, that's what we do. And it's a lot of fun. We're up to about almost a 500 million views on YouTube on various channels and so on. So that's a lot. And people watch, I should add really quickly, people watch because they want to understand that the young, very few viewers are college age students. So a lot of high school kids watch, but it's adults who want to understand how young college students are thinking these days. Yeah, so they get a chance to do that in my class.
That's incredible. And first of all, congratulations on such a successful project. I mean, from going from an online class to now being broadcast to for anyone around the world, and the fact that both of you are able to put together such a project that brings in college students so that they are making the college experience themselves in that class. And I'm really fascinated by what these students have said. I mean, Lori mentioned the PBS documentary. I remember, I think one of those segments was you brought a white woman and asked her to look for the darkest skinned person, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, like this is," and,
You
but
could feel it in the room. That was so intense. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
girl who was picked as the darkest skinned person, she obviously embraced it, and that I think is what's so interesting is how seeing these college students embrace their identities, but also being able to share that. And Sam, I'd like to kind of ask you a bit more about that because there's so many people who say, well, they're just college students, they're young, maybe even too young, they're still developing, but they really do offer some really unique perspectives. It's not just me saying that as someone who taught
Mm.
my first undergrad class this past semester. I really have watched the videos, and there's some really eloquent speakers there. There's people who sometimes, particularly on foreign policy, can obviously it's a tough subject to talk about, but at the end of the day, they still share their views, and of course you, Sam, you facilitate that. So what is it about college students and just the experience of being at Penn State or that makes this project unique
Yeah.
in that sense?
Well, I think that we don't often ask young people what they think in a classroom setting, right? It starts at a very young age, and unless you're in a kind of a unique type of educational setting, like some kind of Quaker setting or some other type of teaching. I can't think of any names right now. Maybe Lori can know, but these non-traditional forms of education, we're not asking people to think, and so or to say what they see. And and in my class, I'm again, it's like, look, there's no right answer, A, and B, there are no gotcha moments. I'm not going to kind of do say something that's going to call you out. I'm going to ask you a question that you will, for which you will have an answer. You absolutely have to have an answer. So, or you can have an answer because and the answer might be, I don't know, I've never thought about that before. It's like, oh, well, you know, think about it now. Does it take you anywhere? And so sometimes they'll just say, no, I really don't have anything to say. And then I'll move on to the next student. But usually people have something to say. And I think that's so intriguing you get to hear people thinking out loud, so to speak, right? And it's pretty fascinating, especially on these really controversial issues. It might be like trans students and athletics in the United States, right? We want to, stop any trans students from participating in athletics, on teams other than the gender, sex in which they were born, kind of thing. It's like, well, all right, well, what do you think about that? And then, you get to hear these students from around the world, right? Because 40% of my class are well, 30% are international students, but about half the class are students of color or international students, right? So you get all these backgrounds and you get to hear how they weigh in on this stuff. It's so fascinating. To me, it's really interesting. That's why I teach this way now exclusively because I'm really, after 41 years, I'm pretty bored listening to myself, but I never get bored listening to other people. So,
So interesting, and I'm glad that you really highlight the international students and the students of color too. I think it's so valuable for them to be part of the space and to see these other different perspectives. And I'm just again, I also am glad that you've told the students to not have to take notes and all. You first of all, you're saving probably a lot of paper and electricity
yeah.
to that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
think Penn State should maybe reimburse you for some of the energy costs that they're
Yeah.
saving on that.
Also, just the absurdity, you think about all the notes that you've taken, and now, you throw most of them. We don't remember anything from our classes, right? Like that's the nature of how this works, right? You take notes, you memorize them for exams, and then that's it. And maybe a tiny fraction of these kind of factoids that we've gotten throughout the course of our lives, we remember. And so for me, I don't, I want you to just sit and be inspired. And that's it. That's the best. If you want to learn anything more, you can get on your phone and look it up. But if you can look it up, I have no business talking about it. You know, like, that's kind of the way I operate.
Almost like instead of giving people fish, it's best to teach them how to fish in
Mm-hmm.
that sense.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And listen, and you're a historian, right? So for you, it's a little bit different, right? You want your students, you don't want them taking very detailed notes because look, they can get that from online from all the writings, but you want them to just be able to write some outlines that will help them to develop their understanding of history. And you don't take notes in a narrative fashion because that's just a waste of time. But write a few tiny like bullet points in places that you think, okay, that's important. So let me get that down. That kind of thing, right? So if I were doing a history class, I would have my students be at least writing bullet points. But that's not what we're doing. So I don't have to do that.
Indeed, indeed. Well, Lori, I'd like to turn back to you, and of course, I'll ask Sam the same question as well about some of the challenges of facilitating these conversations. Because of course, it's one of those things where if everybody if it was easy, everybody would do it. And but as Lori kind of alluded to, this takes some practice, some training, and whatnot. And Sam, what you talked about too, about the ability for people to open up and to just to really say what they think and feel. And Lori, I'd like to ask, what do you think is one challenge or the biggest challenge that you have found for encouraging and facilitating conversation about race, ethnicity, and culture, and how you've found to be a great learning experience, but also anything you can share about how to overcome a challenge like that?
Well, let's see. I think the biggest challenge is the way we understand the world means that we can only facilitate a conversation from our own perspective, right? Which, sorry, Sam, I keep saying right. We can only facilitate from our own perspective. And yet, what people need is for someone to be able to take multiple perspectives, right? So I think that we have to continue to challenge a person who's going to facilitate meaningfully, even though your expertise is not necessarily the content area. Your expertise is human interaction and sociological factors and the way groups work and communication techniques and psychology. But you really have to always be a step ahead and asking questions with a beginner's mind. Because, and sometimes one of the things that we do with our student facilitators is we often have conversations that are meant to also just help them explore a topic. So, one, they can see a facilitator at work, but they can also experience dialogue and see what that is. And so, we'll ask a question. For example, if you came to planet Earth as an alien, what would you notice about race, for example, right? And so you can ask different questions when they don't have to start from your own ideological perspective, right? So if you were just like, everyone's the same, we shouldn't have race as a category, we should forget about it, whatever, whatever, that's one narrative. The other is everybody should be able to identify themselves as whatever they are. All cultures should be acknowledged, et cetera, et cetera. That's another way of thinking. But that's not how you can facilitate. You can't facilitate with that limited narrative in your head. And so that is the biggest challenge, is how to be able to be ahead of what the group with individuals are thinking and not be trapped in your own narrative, which is obviously a challenge.
If I could add to that, Lori, are one of the most open-minded person, or at least open and open to people with ideas that other people would find completely intolerable, because you have a deep curiosity for how they got to those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you have such strong opinions and thoughts about so many things, but yet you're so open, yeah, it's really remarkable.
I have
So,
strong opinions about conflict and culture and all of these things because I've been watching it succeed and fail in front of my eyes day after day after day after day.
but
And
but
yet,
you're really smart, and you're a quick thinker, and you're smart, and you know a lot about many things. And so, you put things together, and yet you'll very just you put these, disparate ideas together, and then you'll just pull them apart
mhm.
because someone says something, and you'll be like, "Oh, okay, I'll pull that apart and see what it looks like." And so I say that because it really, I see how I have a front row seat to how incredibly difficult it is to be a facilitator, or at least would be really difficult for me, even though I'm also really open-minded and I change my thinking about things all the time. But still, you're, you do that in such fascinating ways. So anyway, Sherman, it's really it's really fun to watch. And as as academics, or as people who, our job is to think about the world in innovative ways, it's it's really fun to participate in. And it feels like it's a more direct path to wisdom, as opposed to just intellect, because wisdom embraces contradictory ideas and so on. So it's cool. Yeah.
I mean,
Now,
I probably wouldn't say contradictory only in the moment, but I would much more say paradoxical.
Oh,
You
paradoxical. Yeah,
because
that's better.
paradoxical is truth, right? There's things that are in tension, but they're both true,
Yeah,
or
I would
multiple
say that.
things are true. And so seeing that in right in front of me day after day, dialogue after dialogue, it really does it really does something to me. But there was one other thing I just wanted to say quickly. I don't know if I can get back to it. Because your question was about challenges.
right. Mm.
And I think what's most important really is that there's so much possibility between people. Sam, one time I did this video a couple of months ago where Sam and I were sitting in the frame, and I said, "Hey, everybody, here's our marriage. Do you see it? Can you see it? Not me, not Sam, but our marriage. And our marriage is that invisible thing between us that we create together, and that is only a product of us, but it's more than me or Sam. It's, the 1 + 1 = 3. And that 1 + 1 = 3 is in play all the time. And it is the most underutilized resource of human life because relationship is so crucial. And so things like debates are they so miss the point. And I love listening to people debate. Trust me, I find it fascinating to hear the different ideas. But if we want to build the world and we want to solve problems, we can't just talk at each other and not actually interact with each other and respond and build and test and all of those things. So the most important thing is the space in between, and that is not the most important thing on the planet, but in this sphere that we're talking about. And that is where the facilitator and the expertise of people who can work in that space is so necessary, so invisible, and therefore so undervalued. I mean, profoundly, to the point that it doesn't even exist to most people, that there's someone that can help because everybody says to me, "Oh, can you just give me a couple pointers so that I can go have this dialogue?" I'm like, seriously? Like, would you say that to a heart surgeon? You know what I mean? Like, you can't do your own heart surgery. You've got to have people. I mean, you have to have people with expertise, and most of us don't even know a person who has that kind of expertise. Therefore, we don't even know it's possible. And so I feel like we fail so often because we just don't even know there's a resource. And it's sad for me to watch happen over and over and over again.
I definitely share with Sam's sentiment. It is so easy to say, "Oh, I can do that. I can facilitate a conversation." But I think when you see it, though, you see it happen. It's like, wow, this is a little harder. I say little, actually, a lot harder than you think. But I do think that because of the people I've gotten to learn from, whether it's professors or friends or family, it's so important to just put yourself out there and to really be open-minded. And
Hmm.
there's someone, I was at a networking event recently, and someone asked, "Oh, what is your goal in terms of being here?" And I said, "I don't really have a goal in terms of when I go out and meet people. You just have to meet people, and you
Right,
have to
right.
just
Uh-huh.
because I don't know these people. It's like, how would you know what to look for if you don't know them?" And
Hmm.
I do think that value of, again, putting yourself out there. I think this is also a great feature of facilitators, that they really put themselves out there to facilitate and not necessarily just only be like a traffic cop, but really to, I think, the presence of that facilitator, that is so key. Well, Lori and Sam, I'd like to now move to the last about 20 minutes or so, and
Hmm.
we're going to kind of shift gears. I mean, it's not really shifting gears a whole lot because we're really just building on what we've discussed already. And since race, ethnicity, and culture is covers so many different areas, I figure it would be best to hone in on one topic area just to demonstrate to people what it's like to discuss something that, of course, Sam, in your social 119 classes, you've had people of mixed race backgrounds there to talk a little bit more about their stories. And I like to start our conversation today. This is very much a semi-open discussion here,
Hmm.
but as we've talked a little bit before of our recording, I'm mixed race. It was something that I didn't really think about a lot because I guess you just kind of go with some other priorities in life. You're trying to figure out how the world works, and it was already kind of complex. It still is complex, and in many ways. But I didn't really think
And
about it a whole lot. I just felt that I felt like I was just me, and I encountered people of all different backgrounds and whatnot. But then over time, you start to notice, you start to see in some ways. On one hand, when you see that maybe on through the news that there's a certain group is where someone's been targeted because of their race, and you start to see some of those stories. You don't really change. I think in my world, I don't really change, doesn't change a whole lot about maybe how I see myself, but I definitely am more conscious of it now in terms of how people describe their identity and describe in terms of race, ethnicity, and culture. The other thing too is I think as someone is mixed race, people always wonder, they don't always know exactly what sort of combination, but they know I'm mixed. And so the questions oftentimes is like, well, what are you, like, what are you a
Mhm.
mix of? And it's kind of an interesting question too, because I always kind of wonder, like, oh, I wonder why they don't ask who you are instead of
Mhm.
what are you. I think they have good intention. They just want to know. But it's really an interesting combination where I get to tell people, say, I get to embrace both sides of me as an American. I get to, for example, if I go to my dad's Orthodox church, or I talk a little bit about my dad's side, then I feel that Ukrainian side of me, I guess. Or maybe when I'm posing for a picture, I'm not smiling. Maybe that's a stereotype of East Europeans or something. And
Mhm.
on the other side, as I mentioned to both of you, I speak Mandarin to my mom, and I get to embrace that side of me, and I'm very proud of who
Yeah,
I
you're very
am,
lucky.
and it's because of, again, the people I'm surrounded with that make
Mhm.
me who I am. So I like to just kind of open up to maybe Lori first, and then Sam, in terms of what sort of elements of discussion you think are important, or something that you thought about when you heard the topic of mixed race in America.
Well, when I hear you talk about yourself as a mixed person, and you say that you just grew up as yourself. You didn't really think about it. And I think that's a particular thing that's really important. And it is just whatever kind of thing if nobody makes it an issue for you. But if the entire social world around you makes it an issue or your family makes it an issue, then it's an issue. And so I think the reason that mixed race people, why we even talk about it, is because for certain groups of people, that is an issue or was an issue, depending on if we're talking historically or we're talking now. And
And
so
when you say issue, what do you mean by that?
meaning it's a conflict. So you actually
Well,
can't wait. Can I just, can
go,
I,
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
because your people are either at war with each other, or at war. I say that, I use that very broadly, but, um, or it means something that means you're lesser of a person. So I'm just thinking of white and black people, right? People who are mixed in that way, and just think of it historically. For that person who is white and black, for many of those people, that you were less of somebody because you were not just white, you were also black, and also you're not fully black, although the black community would have probably embraced you more so, but that means you're not white, right? And so when communities are at odds or there's imbalance, asymmetry in the communities, then it's very different. Or even if your Orthodox family and the other side of your family are at war with each other or don't like those two things, then it is an issue. Then you will grow up knowing it's an issue, and then you will choose. You have to choose. And I think the most important thing for me about mixed people who grow up with that tension, not by their own choice, but by the communities that they happen to be born into, they have the ability, they know, they're the people that know that you are both, and that this idea that we have to choose one or the other is foolish, ridiculous, and impossible. And yet people do it all the time. And I always say to mixed people, you are our leaders. Like, because you are part of both communities, and no one can tell you you're not, even though everybody does tell you that. Um, and again, not people like you who've grown up where those things, maybe you have more to say, but aren't necessarily in so much tension that you were aware of it. So that's what I would say. That's where I would start with mixed people.
So I would, so Lori, and you, Lori, grew up mixed in the sense of ethnic or culturally, in the sense of, Polish on your mother's side and Irish on your father's side,
But
which
more
is
the tension was more with Catholic and Protestant.
Catholic and Protestant. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so what's interesting with Lori and I, a difference. And fully addict. Well, your work, Lori, has just so become grounded in conflict because that's what you're doing. You're training conflict facilitators.
Yeah.
So it's so
My
interesting.
life is grounded
No,
in
but
conflict.
when you say the issue for me, I think well mixed. Yeah, I think mixed ancestry. The issue of mixed ancestry. It's not issue as a problem. It's an opportunity. You just engaged in the conflict area of it. It's an issue for people. For me, it's an issue for everybody in that it's just something that's unique about them. So it's something that's
Or not
us
unique, right? I mean,
or not unique. Yeah, but if it's not unique, then that's its own issue or subject of conversation. And I just find because I'm so fascinated by the world and I'm very much a globalist and I study cultures all over the world and I'm interested in any culture anywhere, that when someone says they're mixed, uh, to me, that's wow, it just adds something, a greater level of of analysis to somebody's life, right?
mhm.
So, and we all bring it. Me, I'm a mix of a lot of Western European backgrounds. My culture, my ethnicity was not important to me growing up. We never talked about it. I was just this, middle American white working class kid. But I find it really fascinating. So, for you in your case, Sherman, the fact that you bring these different nations and cultures together in your life, it's like, wow, what these like awesome opportunities.
You have like the
And
best of both worlds
yeah,
experience, right? Which is
yeah,
what we would hope everybody would have.
or they would at least see it as like these are just really cool things to talk about. Like, why not talk about our so-called race, whatever that really is, but
But
our
if you
ethnicity, culture, and that sort of thing.
But Sam, I'm going to say, but if you want to not take it from like the sociological, the conflict part, which
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I respect. I also think it's interesting the way in which the human family is designed, which is, I think, for the most part, it's like you bring two people from two families together, right? Which are just inherently different humans. And so there's
Mhm.
always a mixing of differences to create, man, woman creating a child, which is and then a family. And so it's interesting that at some point there's a point where like that's too different. You know what I mean? Or for some people it's too different. That's the only
Mm.
reason we have that conversation. Otherwise it would just be what it is, which
Yeah,
is different people coming
or they're
together.
not yeah, or they're not intrigued enough about it to talk about it. It's like currently, like let's stop talking about race and ethnicity. So I'm like, why? This is so interesting. It's so cool. Like let's talk more about it,
But it's not just race and ethnicity, it's class,
It's
right?
class,
It's, I
it's
mean,
gender, everything. Talk about all of it. Like all these different, look, gender it's this huge spectrum. So like, why can't let's talk about all these different these dozens of places, hundreds of places you could be on this spectrum of gender. It's like why not engage in that? But like, well,
I
because
don't,
some people come along and they start making demands about how to engage in it, and then that's a problem. But otherwise, it's just everything is just so fascinating, you know.
but it also creates like society. And so I'm just being the sociologist here,
All
but
right.
society has certain structures, right? So even
Yeah.
if you just use class, right, le- there's a lot of reasons. This is a functionalist argument. There's a lot of
Okay.
reasons for people to stay in their lane. You know,
Yeah.
because you disrupt things when you actually cross over into into above or below a different culture. And so that changes the culture, it changes the people, it forces questioning of morale and morals and norms and values. And so it's disruptive to society. This is the functionalist argument for these things to happen. And so I don't think
Okay.
it's
Okay.
just fascinating or not. I think it's
Okay.
also challenges the structure of a society, of a culture, of a community. And if you're Catholic and suddenly you have people coming in and like talking about a completely different set of religious, spiritual, existential values, it it's
Okay.
disruptive.
Okay. So listen, there are limits to that, right? So let's say, Sherman, you've got to decide for the census, right? Okay, we have to count people in the United States, all right? So we want to count. Every nation does a census. So we want to figure this out, right? So then, for the first time 10 or 15 years ago, we allowed people to actually write down what they said their background was. Well, you just get literally thousands upon thousands of new boxes that you create, right? Okay, we can't have that. I mean, well, we can because it's really interesting, but there's not much we can do with it. And so then the problem becomes when somebody like Sherman here decides, hey, I'm not just white, I'm not just mixed. I'm white and Taiwanese. Oh, wait a minute. I'm Ukrainian and Taiwanese, and Ukraine is not the same as being white. I'm Eastern European and I'm Taiwanese, but I'm not just Taiwanese and then you start making demands that other people see you in a certain way and think about these things in a certain way, and that's when it becomes disruptive. Because otherwise, for me, my job as a professor is to say, hey, yeah, there are limitations as to what we can do and what we can accept and should accept. But in the meantime, let's just be curious about all of it, you
But
know?
but I think it's not just accepting it or not accepting it. I forget what word you used, but because I'm thinking about South Korea right now, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Sam and I just did a deep dive into the declining birth rate, the dangerously declined birth rate. And when you and so one of and so okay, that's one thing, but the other, and another conflict, so a conflict there is in terms of the culture, like what is Korea, what is Korean, and how will we be Korean if we have all these immigrants coming into Korea who don't share our values, who do not share our language, do not share our history, do not share the basic assumptions that we have in social life. And so, and I think that's partly why people, in places where there's tourism, they're like tourists and us. This is how we
Yeah,
operate.
like
That's
in
how they.
Spain right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so I don't think it's just about acceptance, because at some point we're going to say that's not how we do it here. We respect our elders, for example. We treat them this way, and you want to treat everybody the same. Okay, I can accept it, but not in my culture, not in the one I'm building,
Yeah, yeah,
not in the
yeah.
way I've set things up.
Yeah.
And so there anyway, so and it doesn't mean that a mixed person is going to like throw an entire society upside down, but we do have to acknowledge that people who mix, while I think that that is sort of a natural process of people interacting with each other, groups of people
Yeah, yeah,
interacting,
yeah.
there is a way in which it will upend a social order. And again,
No,
that's
okay.
fine,
Let
but
me
it's also real.
All right. So, like a mixed person, like you, Sherman, you're going to have these sides of you that come into conflict a little bit because Taiwanese culture and Ukrainian culture are very different, and so
Yes.
they live in a way inside of you, and that's kind of emblematic or symbolic of how it exists out in the world. And so, you come to terms with that. We come to terms with that, and maybe your mother didn't teach you to speak Mandarin, right? Maybe she decided, like so many immigrants decide when they have a child, I don't want you to be confused. I want you to be an American and you need to speak English. And so I didn't teach you any Mandarin. Like on your father's side, at some point in times they stopped teaching people, I don't know what generation it was, but they stopped teaching Ukrainian. I'm like, why just not teach your kids Ukrainian, man? Just
That's
don't
right.
speak to them in English. Just demand that they learn Ukrainian. Like, and so like, but if she had done that, then you would be here saying like, well, so I have my mom's Taiwanese and I'm kind of a little bit connected to the culture, but I don't speak the language. And that would be perfectly fine. Also, it's fine. For me, I would prefer, because of who I am, I'd prefer, if I were you, that I learn Taiwanese, Mandarin, and I learn Ukrainian. But
And
it
and
would
and this
be
is
okay.
and I'm same. I didn't, people in my family stopped speaking. My grandfather spoke Polish. He went to a Polish school. He didn't teach anybody else because it was the same thing. Nobody speaks Irish. It was just like, "Boop, this you're American." So I wish I had been spoken to in those languages, so I had that in my world. At the same time, I'm also seeing, and this is for me an experience of just being in Korea and watching another culture evolve or devolve. I don't know, depending on which way it goes. There is something about people having a shared language, right? I'm not saying people shouldn't speak
Mm, hmm, hmm.
15 languages, but I'm saying like I've come to understand why a society would say, but no, we speak Mandarin here. Well, this is how it is, and so you can do whatever else you want, but you're definitely speaking this language because we have to speak to each other. We have to make
Yeah.
decisions as a society. So, again, functionalist argument, but I see real reasons why there's a tension and why mixed people sometimes, depending on the communities that they're of, are feel that more intensely in a way that is really hard to live with for some people, just
Hmm,
again depending on where they are in their community and the history of those cultures.
hmm.
On my
But
dad's
by the
side,
way, Sherman, this is how
yes.
Sam and I, this is what we do every day.
I
This
love
is
it.
it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love the dynamic because it really feeds into what we were talking about earlier, right? About how dynamic these conversations have to be. It's not just one person. Person A says something, person B, then person B says something, person A, then and rinse and repeat. It's really, but it's bouncing on what people are saying. The responses and whatnot. And
Hmm.
I think you both made such great points there because and Sam, you mentioned language. I learned Mandarin since I was a kid, but on my dad's side, when my great grandparents came, they didn't teach my
Mm,
grandparents the language. I think part of it was maybe because this was, in the aftermath of the first Red Scare in the
Yeah.
1910s. Certainly, immigrants from that part of the world were not regarded very positively in
Hmm.
terms of political ideology and whatnot. Which is so that was one bit. But I do think this is such a fascinating topic for all the reasons that you both mentioned, because it's really stepping away and really reflecting, thinking about how it is, and that we can better discuss this just in general as a society, because I don't feel offended when people try to guess, or they only think I'm white, or they only think I'm Asian, depending on what we're part of the world. I mean, if I'm in Taiwan, I'm definitely the white guy there, but here it's a bit of a combination. But I don't feel offended at all. I think it's because I've really sort of embraced that. I think both that you can say tension, not in an adversarial way, but just the fact that they're different. They don't fit completely together as puzzle pieces in terms of their characteristics, but also the fact that it's because of these other institutions in my life, whether it be school, whether it be family, whether it be or just social relationships. Those all I've seen those as the glue that keeps me together in a way. I think
Mm-mm.
without those institutions or religion, my dad's Christian, my mom's Buddhist, but because my parents together, we all volunteer for a Buddhist-based charity, but because we're so invested in the actual charity work and the fact that we see that we're basically talking about the same values of kindness and generosity and all that, but just in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I start to see that too. So it really is, I think, a testament to the village around me, the people who've cared for me for so long and continue to do so. And I think
This is, you're saying something, a small part of what I mean when I say mixed people need to lead us. And with ownership of, or internalization is a better word, with really internalizing the bothness, right? So the Buddhist and the Christian parts of you, you're like, I find what is the thread, the dynamic thread of those religious traditions or spiritual traditions, and that's what I live. But you know how to look for that in divergent things, right? You don't have to just be like, it's this or it's this. You're like, oh, but what if I'm doing both? And that's why I'm like, mixed people. Rah rah.
I'm doing my best, trying my best on that, and again, so great again have these for that, and World in
Hmm.
Conversation, Social 19. What a great two spaces for that. So I'm really
Thank
glad.
you.
I'm really glad we had that little exchange there. Before we wrap up, because I know we could be talking about this all day, I'm sure, but I
Yep.
want to be cautious of your time, of course. And I like to really wrap this all up. This is a kind of bit of a tradition on Friends and Fellow Citizens. And we really try to reflect on George Washington's farewell address, which is the basis of the program. So really reflecting on patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, and civility. Those are the kind of pillars of that address. And I'll start with Sam this time. And I'd like for each of you to share a bit about how you think your projects, whether it be World in Conversation, Social 119, and your career, how those relate to those kinds of values that I just mentioned, and kind of the ways we can tie it all together and talk about race, ethnicity, and culture in these with these sorts of pillars in mind.
When I think back to the late 1700s, and I think about, I take myself back to actually the sociological realities of the time. People weren't in communication with people very far away. Very few people were traveling further than, 20 or 30 miles at any one time. There wasn't news of the day. It was all, and then when you got it, it was pretty scattered, you, and, uh, and no one knew what was going to happen to this land. No one had a sense of what it was and what it could be. And then I think of all of the troubling parts, the genocide and slavery and so on, right? The ways in which the indigenous peoples were treated. I mean, it could have gone in so many different directions, and it could have gone much further south. I mean, it's pretty serious to think about, probably the most longest, most extensive, longest lasting genocide, again, to use that word, occurred, in the Americas, in slavery as we saw it here. So it was pretty troubling in a way. And yet, somehow, there was this other force that was in play and that helped to continue to create this nation to be this most amazing experiment. So it's these two things together, right? It's a nobody could ever predict that this country could be in this kind of multicultural, multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and racial mix that it is, and that we've only had one civil war, which is pretty phenomenal. So for me, I think about in the end, it really is based on people being able to have the kind of conversations that Lori and I have been part of creating, that we have between us, um, and that are really instrumental, the hard issues, and ultimately becoming fascinated with the other, because that's, of course, what makes the United States what it is, that people, in the end, when they meet people face to face, they're fascinated with the other. And that's what, kind of scares me a little bit about some of the more recent trends of of not embracing that. That's a bit of a problem and a concern for me. But anyway, that's what I think about when I think about Washington. And when I think about this guy who could have gone in a very different direction, he could have just stayed on as leader, as many people wanted him to do. But yet he, they was part of handing power down and disseminating that power. And that was so important. That was probably the most critical moment in U.S. history, was that moment when Washington gave up the presidency and said, "No, I'm not gonna keep going." Yeah.
Very well
So,
said. Very well said. Lori?
Well, I'm gonna just say something I've not ever said publicly, because when you said you listed patriotism, et cetera, and civility, those were the two words that jumped out. Patriotism is an interesting thing, and when I was a senior in high school, I wrote in the how you put something under your name in the yearbook, and it was something about what are my goals, my life goals. I don't even have life goals, but I had one when I was 17, and it was to significantly prove my patriotism. Whatever that means, I don't know, but I, took a real journey from that point on, where I must have felt some kinship with this place. I don't know why. I was too young to know anything, but I'll just say that. But I took a journey to really a great disappointment with the things that I learned about this place. I mean, we could, history of a genocide, of slavery, and of just other things that are just human constructions that happen. And so to think I'm going to prove my patriotism became something of, quite a joke to myself. But at the same time, I think that the work that I do now, and in particular now, I'm starting an initiative that is called Red Blue Dialogues. And in the moment that we're in, once again, I think we don't have to be this othering and dehumanizing to each other. Like, we are not that far apart on anything. And when you really come together with humans and kind of hash things out. And so I think maybe somewhere when I look back on my life, I'll see something of this work that I didn't choose, but that really chose me as some contribution to, this land that that have all kinds of senses of what it's about. But I do think that the people here, if given the opportunity to be seen fully for who they are, no matter who they are, can become something that is has more unity to it. So that's what I think of when I think of the pieces of that farewell address.
Amen to what you both said. I think George Washington would be a good candidate to be a facilitator world of conversation. What do you think?
Definitely.
You just need to enroll in Penn State. That was the only thing he had to do. If he signed
Exactly.
with
Yeah.
Ben Franklin, maybe he would have been able to do that. uh,
That's funny.
well, Lori and Sam, I will be sure to include the links to World in Conversation, Social Wine, and Teen down to show notes below. But before we sign off, I just like to say once again, thank you both for coming onto the podcast and really for all you do. I am at the University of Alabama, and of course, you can call all the college students around, and to know that there are people like yourselves who have invested so much in young people and who are now going to be out there and to be able to talk about these issues so much more constructively, and to be able to let them express themselves, and for you both to have done all the work that you've done to let that happen, let them blossom. I really look up to both of you, and I'm not
Mhm.
just saying that as a PhD candidate and looking to complete the degree. I'm also saying that because I really think what you both do is truly admirable and something that I hope will grow beyond just Penn State and beyond Pennsylvania, beyond our country. And I'm sure it's already have had such an impact across the world. And just once again, thank you both for the conversation we had. And I imagine that the dynamic energy and all that you bring to the different groups and the different classes. It's truly admirable. So thank you both so much for coming on our podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for finding us and
Yeah.
for lifting up the work in this way. And it's really our honor to work the way we have and to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I really appreciate it. And good luck with all of your work and your
Yeah.
PhD studies and so on. It's a fun journey, isn't
It
it?
is.
Graduate school, when you didn't when you kind of get into it, it's really a lot of fun. Yeah.